now we come to the final session of the day, skills mapping to drive workforce development from school age. It is my pleasure to introduce David Linke, Managing Director of EduGrowth, and Pauline Farrell, Founder of Skills for the Future. Over to you, David.
Thanks very much, Danny, and welcome along, Pauline.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Let me begin with a little bit more formality than that. So to all our audience, thank you very much for tuning in. We're delighted to be able to support the Victorian Government in showcasing Victorian education technology and innovation to the world, and especially around the UAE right now. So we're both delighted to be here. We're going to have a really incredibly big topic, but before we do that, Pauline, allow me to be again, a little bit more formal. Pauline is a learning transformation and learning innovation specialist with 20 plus years of experience. We won't dwell on that too long, Pauline. We don't need to look at those time frames. Has extensive experience as a leader in online and blended learning, has led transformation projects for students, for teachers, for institutions. Current major research interests focus on the future of work and how education evolved to meet the emerging needs of the workforce. She works globally across education technology, helping education providers transform. She's worked in TAFE, private RTOs, private higher education providers within government and private enterprise. So there's no one better, in my opinion, to tackle a topic that we're trying to tackle today, which is the idea of there's a lot of focus on lifelong learning, yet we currently do not have a systematic approach to assessing the skills students need in schools, will need for jobs that may not even exist yet, and may not even exist once they start their post-secondary schooling environment.
Yeah.
Pauline Farrell, Skills for the Future, is collaborating with the Victorian Government to map the necessary skills for students to be successful. So, with all of that stuff, why don't we begin with a really simple question? Education used to be really simple. We went to kindergarten, we went to school, we went to university or TAFE, and then we went and got a job. But it's changed significantly. What's the overarching narrative between the beginning of our schooling system and getting into the workforce from a skills perspective?
I think what's really been interesting is the fact that students are far more engaged and far more, in some ways, far more informed and far more knowledgeable about where they want to go for their careers and what they want to do. I'd also say that students are also, to a certain extent, far more willing to make their own choices in that they don't want to go and work for somebody for 50 years. And to a certain extent, they don't have the chance to do that. I'd also say that a number of the jobs students can already see and their parents can already see are evolving and changing. But I'd say some of the biggest changes are that there were very traditional pathways that we had in our school system for a lot of years. And those traditional pathways that kids were sort of either academically inclined or they were kinesthetically inclined. They sort of went off and did a trade, or they went to TAFE, or students sort of did well at school and then off they went to uni. That whole paradigm has certainly changed. And if we're looking at 40% of students are going to join the gig economy, and they're very aware of the fact that they most likely will end up running their own businesses or subcontracting, or they're going to pivot through their career and change jobs 7 times. I think the landscape has changed exponentially, and the only thing that really realise that they have in common is there's some base skills they need to have that allow them to actually meet all of these changing market forces. And a lot of them are out of their control. So I think that whole narrative has really changed, and it's no longer you go to school and then uni, or you go to school and then TAFE. Lifelong learning is pervasive and it's necessary even within your own job to keep up, let alone prepare yourself for where you're going to go.
I think there's a really interesting conversation around the regulatory frameworks around that stuff, but I want to leave that, and we may or may not get to it, because I think that creates some challenges for how learners and their families and their advisors and all of that sort of stuff and their friends and families fit into it. But let's go back and now let's start thinking about a child that might be in primary or secondary school.
Yeah.
Focusing maybe on the later part of that and thinking about why is there a need to think about skill development for jobs when you're in secondary school?
So there's a whole range. As you would imagine, there's a really complex answer to that, but I'm going to give you 3 really simple answers to it. One is that for many students, they go into the secondary school system and they're really not clear on what they want to do. In Victoria alone, we have something like 68% of our students are not clear what job they want to go into, let alone what career they want to actually aspire to. We have some really clear directives around that there are groups of children and students that are really clear on what they want to do, but a lot of those kids then really not sure what they want to do. The second part of that is that manifests in a whole range of things. One is a number of our students, to be brutally honest, we've got high dropout rates in some of our TAFE courses and certainly some of the university courses, because once the students get in there, that's often their first experience to go, oh, like my son, is that what it's like to be a teacher? So we did 1 year of a teaching degree and went, yeah, I actually don't want to be a teacher. So there's got to be better ways for our students to be able to explore careers, explore the skills they need, and explore opportunities before they go in, because there's a real mental health outcome from that, where our kids are very used to success and being rewarded for success. And the whole idea that you have to drop out multiple times in order to find your place is really scary. And I'd say the third thing with the skills mapping particularly is that as jobs evolve, some jobs are evolving rapidly out of existence. Some jobs, even more interestingly, for example, I'm fascinated in the trades. If you look at a traditional bricklayer, traditionally those jobs are very much around learning from your master, literally that's what trade's about, and then moving on. If you look now with the advent of robotics and 3D printers, you're actually having to have quite high order skills in order to be able to be highly successful in that job into the future, let alone 3D printing of homes, let alone the use of new technologies in smart homes. Those fundamental skills that we took for granted that have been a truism the last 600 years or so are evolving rapidly. So I'd say skills are probably the thing that will sit most comfortably and are able to be transferred across multiple jobs. In the past, it's been qualifications. You go in, you do a qualification to become, let's say, a psychologist. Whereas if you start to unpack, an architect is a great example. An architect, you could go and do an architect course, a lot of years to study. But the jobs that are evolving out of architecture, the average wage an architect earns is about 90 grand. It takes them about 10 years before they can get a permanent full-time job. But a lot of the jobs are actually becoming in BIM technology, building architecture, things like being a technology specialist in the use of things like 3D rendering, 3D printing, all those sorts of things. A professional job is now breaking up into multiple expertises and areas, and that tradition isn't holding true. So I think those skills.
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, those skills are probably the thing that all of those jobs have in common. And the interesting thing, and I always use this as a good example, when I first started in e-learning, there were no courses to become an e-learning specialist. What it was is we looked for people who had really good skill sets and really good knowledge that we knew we could train up into these emerging areas. But most importantly, we needed people that had a really good attitude. And we all know, teachers know, the people that are willing to learn quickly, research, hunt down new things and experiment, they're the ones that are often hunting down the new jobs and the new opportunities.
So let me go back and circle back to you. So we started with this idea of three things, right? So we talked about the fact that young people don't know what job they want to do. I'm going to preface that and say, I'm 48. I don't know what job I want to do, so let's not be harsh on young people. Dropout rates within courses are increasing or staying the same or not decreasing? I don't know.
Well,
what do you think?
Well, it really depends. So, for example, I know that 5 years ago, the Bachelor of Psychology was the new Bachelor of Arts to a certain extent, and Deakin reported retention rates of only 52%. Some of our TAFE courses have got massive retention rates. So it really comes down to whether they're very vocationally honed. Your retention rates are much higher if there's a job at the end of it. If kids get in and start doing a TAFE course and realise there aren't a lot of jobs at the end of it, I think they're going to start to doubt whether that's the right course for them, because ultimately kids are going to school because they want to get a job and develop a career or a business, let's be honest.
And you remind me of a statistic which I have never verified. I just keep quoting it, so we'll assume that it's correct. We'll assume that it's right. The time from this statistic, which I feel the statistic was from about 18 months ago, so let's go with the end of 2019 as the data point. It was something like there were currently open 1.4 million jobs around the world for cybersecurity specialists. That was the metric that was provided, and it was provided by a CEO of a TAFE. And the point is, at that point in time, all of the graduates worldwide from university courses was only 300,000 students, right? So therefore, if you're waiting for these graduates, they're not going to come, which is a really nice segue for us to talk about. I think if I got your premise right, we're going to take these big pieces of qualification and certification, and we're going to break it down into the subset skills within it, right? Is that what I've understood correctly?
Absolutely. So this series of projects the Department of Education has put money forward, and we're well underway now, is a really exciting premise, because what it bases a couple of really key bits of data. One is that a number of our students aren't clear on what career they actually want to have. Two is that traditionally our students will go into vet and schools program, and completion rates aren't high for a whole lot of really good reasons. And so, for any good example, is both my kids went in and did in their HSC or VCE.
I'm going to pause 1 second, Pauline. I'm going to time out. We've used some jargon, so I'm going to do a jargon buster. We've got a whole bunch of people who are don't understand our use of the term vet, and then we're going to define the term vet in school. So do those first two, and then you can continue on to your train of thought. All right?
Okay. So traditionally in Australia, we have our traditional schooling, and that tends to be divided into, once they get to the final years, so usually when they're 16, 17 and 18. In Victoria, they've had a choice to do a qualification, effectively end of school, which is an academic option, which is the vocational certificate of education. That's the traditional subjects like history and maths and all those sorts of things. The kids that don't want to go that academic stream, they've been able to, enrol in a course called VCAL, which is the Victorian Certified Applied Learning, a Certificate of Applied Learning qualification. That has a very different approach, and that's very much around giving students literacy, numeracy, workplace skills, and then they usually choose a vocational course to go with it. Often those vocational courses are in sort of traditional areas of things like hospitality or trades, or they might be very broad-based like business. What's happened in Victoria is our current government is quite innovative in their thinking, and what they're wanting to do is really re-examine what secondary school years is actually going to look like over the next 2 to 4 years. And what they're starting to see is a couple of key drivers. And one of those drivers is around, during COVID, we had quite a number of our students that, well, let's be brutally honest, didn't exactly thrive in doing fully online education. They actually, particularly boys, they love getting out and kicking the footy or playing cricket or soccer. Football, for those, I apologise for calling it soccer. And they might have enjoyed the social component, and that was part of their, motivating factor to go to school. When you're stuck completely, in a COVID situation where you're not getting to do that, there's a number of kids that, quite frankly, really didn't choose to continue to engage. The second thing is knowing that a lot of our students were coming out quite unclear on what their career outcomes were going to be and what course they needed to enrol in was quite concerning. And the third thing, and this is not unique to Victoria or unique to Australia, the mental health challenges of our students, particularly between 15 and 19, are quite significant. And Dr. Michael Carr-Gregg put statistics that 15 to 18-year-olds, something like 30% of them will suffer from depression or anxiety at any given time. Now, take that into this emerging situation. It's timely for us to be looking to transform how we engage with kids of this age and what we focus on. So I'm going to just give a bit of historical context. If we go back 200 years ago, we had the Industrial Revolution. Schools were set up to be able to skill up our workers. 20 years ago, only 10% of our students went to uni. The rest of them either went straight into the workforce or they went to TAFE. That was the reality. 20, 30 years ago, absolutely, because we had a parliamentarian who came in and wanted all of our students to have the opportunity for an academic outcome. What's happened over those intervening 20 to 30 years is in Victoria, we now have something like 51% of our students go to uni and only 28% of them go to TAFE, whereas the statistics were almost the other way around 20 to 30 years ago. So we have a workforce, and we have a whole group of kids that are now starting to feel that perhaps they're ready to go to work. They don't want to go to uni, or they do. They're really unclear on what they want to do. And so into this, we've had this wonderful opportunity to do a whole lot of research and to really work out how we can actually build a course that can assist with our students in the senior secondary years. And what
can I just jump in again, Pauline, just for clarification? Yeah. We're talking about VET is the acronym that we would use for vocational training here in Australia.
That's right.
When we talk about VET in schools, that basically means students in secondary school in Victoria who can access vocational training from typically a TAFE provider. It's only TAFE, it's not RTOs, is it? It's only TAFE?
No, some RTOs can actually deliver it.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, so we've got some
So
really
these
good
are
providers.
acronyms. TAFEs are government-owned vocational trainers, and RTOs are typically privately owned. And essentially, these courses you can do within your Victorian Certificate of Education, or your what was called Victorian Certificate of Applied Learning, which is going to change. And this is what you're working on right now, right? So you're specifically
Absolutely.
working on this project in the Victorian Government. You want to give us a quick introduction to that, and then I want to talk about how it's being implemented.
Absolutely. So just for equivalence, so for TAFEs in Victoria, what they actually are is that they're an equivalent of community colleges or even polytechnics from a global point of view. And so they're very large public institutions. And so what we have is a really interesting mix where for some of our students doing those final secondary years, they can choose to do this project as one of their subjects. Traditionally, our students doing those senior secondary years usually do 5 or 6 subjects, and that helps them get a score to get into the course they want to at uni or to get into the university that they choose. So what we're saying is that no longer do we want to have students feel that they've only got 1 or 2 choices. We want them to have multiple choices. So what this course provides is that students in a particular program called Head Start Enterprises is that these students can choose this particular course. What this course does, it's very different. It is mapped skills globally and divided them into the following: human enterprise skills, so your old soft skills; technical skills, so your digital learning, which all of our students need to have a baseline on how they can actually not just survive but thrive in the current workplace, take on new technologies. And then the third option for them in this particular course is they can actually choose multiple specialties of jobs of the future, and they can choose between 2 or 3 of those for them to explore the potential for new careers. And I'll give you an example. There's 32 specialty areas. Those 32 specialty areas could cover anything from social learning, or social media, all the way through to drones, robotics, help desk, cloud computing, artificial intelligence. They could do things like telehealth, and it gives them the opportunity to really explore these emerging areas. And the only thing they've all got in common is technology. So this student could actually get through and start to realise that they're doing help desk and don't like it. It's okay, David. They can stop doing that one, choose another stream, add it to it, and still get a qualification.
Is it a qualification in, like we would typically think as a qualification, or is it micro-credential? Is it skill level qualification? What is it they're getting at the end of it?
So what we've been able to do with these particular qualifications is we've been able to embed both skill sets and capability sets. That in the future, and what we're currently working on, so they'll be issued a whole set of skill sets. So that has actually got employment outcomes. So an employer can look at this qualification and say, wow, this kid's got a skill set around data analytics, they've got a skill set around website development, and they've got a skill set around social media. And if you look at a lot of our entry-level roles, and we've just analysed 82 entry-level roles, most of the employers have got a certain number of skill sets that they want new people, young people coming into the job to be able to do. And interestingly, a lot of it is help me with my website, help me with my help desk, help me with being able to do a bit of data. All that sort of stuff, a lot of our businesses have got in common for entry-level students.
And I think you said you're doing human enterprise, right? You're doing human-centric skills too.
We are, and they sort of cover. And so what we did is we did an analysis across things like Deloitte's, KPMG, Burning Glass, what else was there? OECD. So there was like 12 different skills matrices. And what we did is we looked at all of those and worked out what they all had in common. And no one's going to be surprised when I tell them the human enterprise skills covered off things like teamwork, digital learning, financial literacy, innovation, entrepreneurship, customer service, all the things that we've been talking about forever. And in the digital skills, no one's going to be surprised when I say that most of the businesses wanted the students to come out with skill sets or capability sets around data analytics, around Microsoft, and most interestingly, working with technology. So can they actually work in an environment conferencing, or they need to be able to put up a blog? And so it's basically providing our students a baseline around the skills they need to be successful in the workplace. The most important thing about that is these are all transferable skills, which means that if they choose to then go to TAFE or uni, that's okay. They can build on these skills and they can change careers with these base skills in place.
I think that's the point that goes back to your opening, right? Which is dropout rates may be being impacted in certain locations. And now what you're saying is the qualification or the certification at the end, great, but along the way, we're going to tick a whole bunch of other activities. And I'll give you the personal example. Having employed a lot of young people over the last, say, 10 or 15 years, one of the things that's incredibly hard to test, if you like, are those human-centric skills, because it's you can't employ purely on the technical skill because it's generally not there. You have to take on, do they know, are they innovative, are they creative, are they teamwork orientated, are they task orientated, and these things are really important. So being able to get some verification of those in some sort of micro badges is really exciting, which now
It
you want to add something there?
Well, I was going to say that the fifth project, which hasn't been signed off yet, is to look at a micro-credential qualification framework. And I won't talk much about it, but there's very much a future vision in mind around how we will be able to build that over a 3-year time frame, and how students, will be able to be issued a qualification with skill sets and capability sets embedded. But the dream and the aspiration as we build towards this is for students to actually be able to issue not just micro-credentials, but macro-credentials. In other words, 4 micro-credentials with a capstone project, which will lead to a micro-credential, which is some of the work I've done in the past with Navitas, which is a really interesting and very successful international education group.
We'll come back to your micro-credentials in a minute, but let's jump into what I'm interested in is go back to this Victorian Government concept, all right? Let's get students to trial a whole bunch of specialists, get skill tick boxes, if you like, across human-centric skills, digital learning, and specialization. What's the technology and the practices that are being built to deliver this at scale? I think there's 2,000 something schools in Victoria. So how do you scale it to all of them?
Well, this has been a bit of a challenge. One of the things that certainly came to fruition, and the Department of Education in Victoria is very aware of this, and I don't believe I'm speaking out of turn, is at the start of COVID, what became very, very clear to most of our educators, and I have a brother and sister who are both educators, was there wasn't a consistent delivery mechanism or learning management system that all the schools, private and public, actually used to deliver. And so at the start of COVID, it was quite challenging for some of the school teachers. And I always use the example of my brother, who was very excited and was up there developing Google Classrooms and doing this amazing job teaching other people what to do. Adversely, my sister, and she won't mind me saying this, almost went fetal. She found it all quite overwhelming, that not only did she need to teach all these grade 2s, 7 and 8-year-olds, she actually had to deliver it, virtually, and keep them entertained and educated. And I think what came out of that, and it was the same for the secondary schools, was a very deep awareness from the government that they needed a more systemic approach. Now, we're not saying this project is solving all of those problems, but what we have done is we've been able to go into partnership with a group called eWorks. eWorks, traditionally in the TAFE sector, used to run a TAFE-wide learning management system. And so what they've built for us, effectively a content repository. And that content repository means all of the courses that we're building will sit there. So then the TAFEs that are delivering these qualifications will have a consistent approach. On top of that, we'll be able to build any badging systems, and we'll be able to actually put that all in one place. Because the one thing anybody who's worked with the Victorian and the Australian government knows is that we really work hard to keep our training packages up to date. That's a fantastic opportunity, but it's also incredibly challenging because there's a lot of investment that goes into our assessments and resources and our simulation. So that's the first thing we've done. We've got an open learning management system that we are also working with a woman called Rosalie Stogard at the department, who also has a repository to make sure everything is accessible to our TAFEs and schools. The second thing we're doing is building a simulation engine. So one of the critical things is that not all students, when they choose a specialty opportunity, like let's say they choose, help desk and Cisco computing, and then they choose they're going to do the entrepreneurship stream. Not all of them can get work experience in that. That would be unrealistic for me to suggest that. And so one of the things this project is doing is building a simulated smart city. So the students can go into a simulated office environment or work placement or trade opportunity, and they can actually explore what it's like to work and very much be introduced to interviews and videos to talk with people that are actually currently working in jobs of the future and really understand, well, what was their journey to get there? what were the opportunities that they took that allowed them to pivot their careers? What were the opportunities, and where does that person think this job's going to go? And most importantly, what does a week or a day in the life look like for that particular person? And be able to share that at the grassroots level. The third thing that we're really working hard at is building a set of micro-credential badges for the teacher education program, because this sort of innovation is awesome, but it's not going to work unless the teachers come along for the journey. And in Victoria, we have 10 amazing tech schools, they're called, and these are effectively hubs for primary and secondary students to come in and explore new technologies in a very constrained environment, but with the maximum level of innovation. So, for example, there is a fantastic tech school out at a place called Lilydale. They have something like 35 3D printers. They have robotics, drones, simulations, the most amazing opportunity for people to explore the hands-on of technologies. And there's 10 of them across the state. So these PD programs that will all come out with badges, David, will be co-delivered with these amazing hubs of innovation. So teachers get access for their own personal development. So they learn and they live, and then they actually can support that implementation journey. So they're the three critical things we're doing to allow this to scale.
And the really nice thing, I'm pretty certain that eWorks is a fantastic Victorian EdTech company that has a partnership with the Victorian Government as well. So there you go. We tick off all of the boxes as well, talking about innovation in Victoria, and we're enabling it with Victorian EdTech companies, which is a fantastic initiative. I'm interested in, let's talk a little bit about micro-credentials. And then what we might do is we might conclude really with about what we think the future might look like a little bit. But let's talk a little bit about micro-credentials. What are you seeing in the way of thinking around that? You mentioned it was a project that's on the plan. It's not necessarily delivered just yet, but what's the sort of plan?
So I think I'm going to go back a step, David, if that's okay. I've been working on and off in micro-credentials probably for the last 8 years. The first time was when I was working as an executive at Box Hill Institute, and we played with micro-credentials for teacher PD. And I think we implemented it really well until, and what I mean by until, was that you start to realise the biggest challenges aren't the issuing of badges or the creation of this awesome new innovation. It's actually, how do you actually get people to pay, and how do you actually make sure that industry is certified it? And so some of that project planning and certification becomes really critical. So what we've seen across the TAFE, and even to a certain extent the higher education sector, is that we've seen people taking existing subjects or existing units and taking micro-credentials back from that. What we're really excited about in this project is the ability to be able to build a whole qualification based on micro-credentials and skills of the future. And so rather than working backwards, we're building from ground up. That's the exciting opportunity. So students can come in and effectively out of a raft, and once again, it's about that concept of human enterprise, digital technical skills, and then the third piece is being able to explore careers with transferable skills. And so they're not specialising in secondary school, it's post-secondary. That is the role of our TAFEs and our higher education providers, our unis, is they're the ones that will provide specialty or broad-based qualifications. And so often we're getting them. So the micro-credential space is really right for big conceptual thinking, strategic alignments. Things like FutureLearn and Coursera are doing some really interesting and innovative stuff in this space, really interesting stuff. But I think what we're missing is that conceptual and strategic thinking around how do we set up qualifications that allow some freedom and the ability to continue to evolve and have the technology to support us to do that. The tech is only as good as the innovation that it sort of drives.
There's some fantastic Victorian EdTech companies, of which FutureLearn is technically part of now because they're now based in Victoria, but there's also some great companies doing really interesting things in micro-credentials and this space. And EduLex is one that comes to mind.
They're very good.
You meet them in on this program today, but there are also other great Victorian companies like Kahoot Learning who are doing some interesting stuff there.
And Credly's doing some really good stuff too.
Who, sorry?
Credly's doing some really nice stuff too.
If we go back for 1 second, I think there's an interesting idea that you put there, and I just want to go back to it, make sure we don't miss it. And that is building a new micro-credential framework as opposed to taking existing qualifications and cutting them up into micro-credentials. And you think one's more exciting than the other. I'm not saying whether that's a good thing or not. I'm interested in that thinking, that's all.
I think Beverly Oliver's done some brilliant work in this space. She's really done some quite, particularly in the higher education space, and really thought through frameworks and thought through equivalences. So it's a bit like back in the days of MOOCs, they really were just massive online short courses. Where they sort of fell over was that if somebody wanted to do 50 different MOOCs, what did they end up with at the end? Was there industry endorsement for this? And so I'll always ask, what is the outcome for the student? What is the outcome for industry? I'd say that what we sort of need to evolve into this space is starting to really think through, rather than extracting and cobbling together stuff that we've already got. We need some big picture thinking around where we can really take this. I would expect that most of these qualifications would have a life frame or a life cycle of about 5 years, because most of our courses don't live beyond 3 to 5 years. The rate of which jobs of the future and skills of the future are evolving. So I think there needs to be investment in that conceptual thinking, and it might be something as simple as the Macklin Review. And for those of you who don't know, Jenny Macklin was a wonderful MP working within the Victorian State Government. She was asked to do a full review of our VET system or our higher ed system. What she came back with is a whole list of really exciting and interesting recommendations. Part of that, she really identified a couple of core areas or industries that are really going to evolve and need some different thinking in them. And one, for example, was e-care. So what we want is our students, particularly at year 11 and year 12, they know they wanted to go into health. But does it mean they're going to be a doctor, a nurse, allied health, physiotherapist, an occupational therapist? There's a really growing area of allied health workers, personal care attendants, aged care helpers, Div 2 nurses. There's such a breadth of need, particularly as our baby boomers age and as we become more proactive in our healthcare. And I think there's a really exciting opportunity to take some of those big ticket items and start to think about qualifications that pivot and grow over what's known as the Australian Qualification Framework. And what I mean by that, guys, is we have a very clear framework that says Certificate 2 and Certificate 3 are entry level, and by the time you get up to AQF 10, you're doing a PhD. So there's no reason we can't deepen these capabilities through assessment. Does that answer the question, David?
It does. It does. It gives us a really great grounding. So we've got 2 minutes left in our conversation together. So I want to go back to the original question, the original concept. Why do we need to start thinking about the skill-based micro-credential type items in a school setting? Let's finish on that, and we can then thank everybody.
I think there's a couple of really interesting opportunities for our secondary school students. And some of those are, most of our students between 16 and 18 are still exploring who they are, what they want to do with their lives, and where they want to go. Most importantly, they're also trying to understand, and I always call it their superpower. I had no idea what I was really good at other than talking when I was about 17. But it's really, if we give kids the opportunity to explore multiple careers and multiple opportunities, they'll start to really hone in what their excelling skills are before they choose a career. And the more that we can map their passions to their skills, the more success they will have, not just in their careers, but in life. And so I would say that that's one. Two is there's an opportunity to save, and this sounds terrible, a lot of money around retention. The more people go into a course that is really honed to what they want to do, the more likelihood they are to stay and complete that, which is good for government, good for industry, and more importantly, good for families and students. And the third thing, what it does is allows us to build a base of job skills and skills for the future that allows, regardless of what qualification they go into, it's money well spent, because these students can then start to leverage these skills in their part-time jobs, in their future qualifications, and most importantly, they might end up going into a job like as a nurse, but they've built these amazing skills in data analytics that can only enhance their role as a nurse. Or they've learnt these amazing skills in help desk and they go in to become a carpenter. That will still enhance and broaden their skills. So I hope that answers it, David.
It does. It really does, because I think the idea, and I think there's something incredibly exciting about the Victorian Government putting this idea that lifelong learning is something that starts straight away. It's not something that happens once you're past the formal education. So I think that's an incredibly exciting thing. The fact that technology is going to be enable that and drive that is just amazing. So Pauline, on behalf of everyone, I just want to say thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us.
Absolute pleasure. I hope it made sense. But I'd love to hear
great.
questions, comments, or thoughts would really be appreciated.
Wonderful. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you, David and Pauline. It's been an inspiring day with so many interesting discussions. Massive thank you to all our speakers and also you, our audience. Don't forget, we've got a fantastic lineup tomorrow with panel sessions. If you want to take a look at the program, you'll find it on guesteducation.com. The sessions from today will be live on the platform later if you want to rewatch. We'll also publish them on the Guest Education website and social media channels in the coming week. The event platform will remain open after the conference sessions have ended, so please feel free to go back to the event's main page by clicking on the Back to Timeline button and explore the Exhibitor Hall and Networking Hub, where you can connect with our exhibitors and learn more about their fantastic edtech solutions. We look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Take care and bye-bye for now.